Welcome back to the Elias Makos Show, wrapping up the second hour of the program. We will be with you straight through until noon. Now, Canada is set to launch a new immigration pilot program for home care workers, set to begin on March 31st. These programs will offer a pathway to permanent residency for qualified caregivers, replacing the previous pilot programs that expired last June. Let's find out a little bit more. Herbert Brownstein joins us, immigration lawyer. He's also a city councillor in DDO for many, many years. Herbert, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Elias.
Okay, so the last time we talked, we were talking about changes the Quebec government had made, and I think doubled with the changes that the federal government had led to a situation where there were many home care workers, nannies, that were worried that they were going to have to leave the country. Give us all the updates here, Herbert.
Yes, absolutely. Well, last time we talked about the temporary foreign worker program and specifically how it applied to caregivers, and there's been a lot of changes. For example, they've reduced the period under which you can work in Canada from 2 years for a caregiver to only 1 year. And you have to go through a very complicated LMIA, Labour Market Impact Assessment, and CAQ in Quebec, and then apply for your work permit. So by the time you get your work permit, it's almost time to renew it if it's only a 1 year contract. So it's very difficult now and cumbersome for employers and for caregivers.
And I think one of the things that we talked about the last time you were on is how this put people in a situation where if they wanted to stay in Canada, basically they were doing so at their own peril. They were doing it illegally in order to stick around. Is that currently still the case?
Well, I wouldn't say illegally, but they had to get they had to go through multiple applications. Each was every 2 years, now every year, just to be able to remain in Canada legally and work for their employer. And if you were a child care worker in the Montreal region, the Quebec government has put on hold any application for child care workers up until the end of June. So that's an additional problem for caregivers here in Montreal.
Okay, so tell me about this new federal government pilot program set to launch on March 31st. Does that help out the people that are affected by those Quebec government changes?
Well, it helps. Well, first of all, it's important to note that this program is based on what they call pilot projects or ministerial instructions, which means they're federally based. They're only good for 5 years at a time, 5-year programs at a time, and they're limited in numbers. They're quota-based. So only 5 in the last pilot program, which ended in June of 2024, only 5,500 caregivers were able to be accepted under this program. And that's very few, considering that as of 2021, approximately 25,000 migrant caregivers were working in Canada. So it could take ultimately years before their applications are even accepted based on a quota system. And as well, the program only applies outside Quebec. So as we speak, there is no PR pathway for Quebec caregivers unless they're willing to move to another province.
Okay. Well, that is a big thing, right? If this does not apply in Quebec, so I guess the situation we talked about the last time you were on, that continues. That's pervasive.
Oh, absolutely. So there are caregivers in Quebec who are willing to leave the province just to be able to become permanent residents. And many have. They've gone to Ontario, they've gone to Alberta, and if they have family members in other provinces, it's easier for them. If they don't, then they have to reach out and find a way to find a job in another province in order to qualify for permanent residence.
With immigration lawyer Herbert Brownstein. Herbert, let's talk about, for our listeners, why don't you go through these recent policies, who it's affecting, and maybe it's not only the people that are the caregivers, but the families that they're helping. Tell me maybe some stories here that we should be aware of the people being impacted by these government policy decisions.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have Canadian employers here in Quebec that we deal with on a daily basis. The employers are generally either professionals or business people, and the daycare hours and facilities are not suitable for their needs because they may have meetings at night, they have flexible hours, or they travel out of the country. So they need to have an in-home caregiver to look after their children while they're working. And right now, they are faced with severe limitations. As I said, the child care work permits are not available at the normal wage. So if they want to process an application in Montreal, on the island of Montreal, that's the entire island, then they have to be willing to offer a very high wage. Well, the normal wage would be $15.75 and up, and they have to offer $33 per hour in order to be able to submit an application, either to renew the caregiver that's already working for them or to apply for a new caregiver.
Would you say that this category of workers has basically been caught in the crossfire of, the 180 coming out of Ottawa and the continued policy here in Quebec to reduce immigration numbers by any means necessary?
Well, as we know, the figures that were published by the government for temporary foreign workers were something like 750,000 temporary foreign workers last year. And the government indicated that they need to reduce the total number of temporary foreign workers because we have a housing crisis and a social benefit crisis. Our healthcare system is overburdened, and the housing situation is limited. So they tried to cut, but they should be cutting selectively. They shouldn't just be cutting globally without looking into what they're doing. Yeah. And for me, it's an essential workers. They've already recognized, Quebec as well as Canada has recognized that the caregivers that provide care for elderly or people with medical needs are exempt. So those workers are allowed to get workers are allowed to be hired under the normal wage and under the normal process, but they haven't extended to child caregivers.
So what do you say, Herbert,
in this province in Quebec?
Yeah, and so what do you say to someone who says, you know what? Why don't you just pay someone who already lives here, pay them a living wage? You'll get as many, for the people that are using nannies and other home care providers for their children. What do you say to someone who's like, no, you know what? I have no sympathy. Just pay people more. You'll get tons of people to work for you. You don't need to rely on foreign workers for that.
Well, in theory, it could work, but we've posted ads for child caregivers at $33 an hour, and we don't get any Canadians interested to do this kind of work. Canadians do not want to work in individuals' homes and take care of their children or their elderly. It's just not in their culture to do so. So we haven't found any interest.
Herbert, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for coming on the show and shedding some light onto this situation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Herbert Brownstein, immigration lawyer.